Mrs. Edwards, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for taking time to sit down with us. We have a ton of questions from Gather members, so can we just jump right into it? Now, here's a question from Jen in New York. She's a mom of 2 young girls. She wants to know, did your husband do the laundry and the dishes when your children were young?
Actually, he's pretty good about that. He's actually not just pretty good, he's great. There is, they never do it exactly the way you want it done.
Of course not.
But so he's very good about making certain all the counters are clean. That doesn't mean that he doesn't put something that should be on the counter away, so you can never find, where would the salt and pepper be, hon?
Right. So you have given him his marching orders around the house.
Well, we work out a compromise. If he wants to clean however he wants to clean, that's fine. However I want to clean, that's what I do. But honestly, given his travel schedule, he mostly does his own laundry. If he gets in at 11:30 at night, he puts stuff in the laundry so it'll be ready to dry the next morning before he takes off again.
Perfect.
Yep.
In your book, Saving Graces, you describe your decision to hire your friend of 23 years to be with you on the campaign trail in 2004. You wrote, "She has no experience on campaigns, but she was a teacher, and what's more, the mother of 3 boys. That's enough experience to handle any job." What do you think are some of the skills and talents that mothers bring to the workforce?
I was talking about this actually yesterday with somebody. I was saying, the word multitask, is it ever used to describe a man?
Right. No offense to any men I know.
Yeah.
But no.
And I think that, so I think we have the capacity just because that's what we always do. Forced, maybe would never choose to do it, but just by necessity, we're forced to keep a lot of balls in the air at one time, and at the same time to nurture all the people around us. And I couldn't imagine anything better in terms of sort of managing and micromanaging my life than those qualities. Somebody who could keep all those balls. You've got people making requests for press and people making a request for could you make these fundraising calls? Could you call these potential supporters? We need you to go to a town hall or to meet with some poobah someplace, and she can keep all those balls in the air. She's still traveling with me.
Really?
Yes.
And it sounds like, oh, is that you?
That's her.
So nice to meet you. I think I need a Diet Coke. I think you said she could anticipate when you needed a Diet Coke.
Yes.
That is so important.
Yes.
So important. I appreciate that. And as a mother of 2 boys, I can tell you, I know nothing is better training for any kind of work.
Absolutely. And she has 2 twin boys and a boy younger.
Oh my gosh. So I have a question from Yolanda, and she writes, she wanted to know how you dealt with having to deliver the news of your diagnosis, your breast cancer diagnosis, to your kids. How did you tell them that information?
Well, my older daughter just played that straight up, told her at every step, called her at every step when she wasn't there, and then most of the time she tried to be there, so she would be in on every discussion, and treated her as an adult because she is. The younger children is different. They didn't understand. You didn't want to make them afraid, but you also didn't want to lie to them, because at some point they will understand and they'll remember that you didn't tell them the truth from the beginning, and they won't trust you as you're moving on in this process. And I hope to be alive while they're, long after they've begun to understand more about my disease. So it's really important to be honest. The very first time I told them, I said, I have a lump in my breast, and that lump is called cancer, and I'm going to have to take some really strong medicine to get rid of it. But the doctor thinks that the medicine will get rid of the bump. But the medicine also does other things. It's going to, make me sore and everything. And they seemed completely bored by all this. And then I said, and it'll make my hair fall out. And it honestly cheered them up.
Really?
Like, Mommy's going to be a clown.
Right.
So when is that going to happen? And, and so they, but the point was to be as honest as we can. The same thing happened when the cancer, I say came back. I mean, obviously it had never gone away. It was traveling in microscopic form in my body. We said, they found out Mommy still has cancer. And this time it's in my bones. And, at some point I'll probably die of cancer, but nobody knows when that'll be. And then, in order to make this clear to me, and for everybody sitting at this table who's not going to die, raise their hand. We're all going to die, and I think it made it easier for them. But you still have to be honest. Basically give them the elementary school version of it, but with total honesty, realizing you're going to have to live with those words later on.
Right. And kids have an amazing resilience about them that they just
do.
kind of take the information as long as they know they're okay.
Right.
They're
Yes.
like moving on.
Yes.
I think like nothing for me is going to change immediately.
Yeah.
So shifting gears to some Gather members from New Hampshire who have submitted questions. This question's from Jen Munns in Hampton, New Hampshire, and she has a question about Darfur. She'd like to know what your husband would do to remedy the situation there.
Well, we need to be involved, and we're not. We need, NATO has voted, UN has voted to have troops on the ground. The Sudanese have objected to that, and we've sort of come to an impasse. We have not used concerted power. That is the alliance of not just the countries that do business in and with Sudan and Sudanese businesses, but also the banks. They're very dependent on European banks, and we haven't engaged the European banks. So John would do two things. One is he would continue the pressure from the UN, but also add to that NATO, which is a much better record in terms of more immediate response, so that NATO could participate in peacekeeping. Understand that every day this issue becomes more complicated. It used to be the John Dewey militia. It was fairly clear where the lines were. Right. Now we've got splintering going on. It's going to be a lot more difficult. So delay is obviously not in our favor. We need to get engaged immediately in this, which means engaging NATO, which has a more immediate response, to get involved with putting troops on the ground in conjunction with African Union troops, to make certain that we have some manner of peace. It's going to be imperfect until we have some political resolution, part of which can come from the Sudanese, but is unlikely at the present time too. So how do we do that? Frankly, it's the coalition of governments and banks, including pressure on the Chinese. When the president this latest time had additional economic sanctions, he announced sanctions on 31 companies and 3 individuals, as if this was going to be the panacea. Oh, we're going to solve the problem in Darfur with these economic sanctions on these companies. That made it 150 companies against which we had sanctions. Obviously, that was not going to be the answer. And he did it alone, without notifying anybody else. He did it at the same time the UN was trying to put pressure on, which allowed the Sudanese to do very effectively what they had been doing, which is splintering the opposition, just as separating them all, so they could fight these individuals instead of operating in cooperation with one another. But this president has been a lone cowboy in so many different ways. So you engage NATO, you engage the other countries, and in real sanctions that'll make a difference. Put pressure on the Chinese. They're trying to be the good cop now. There's a book out called The Charm Offensive about how they want to be seen around the world, basically the way America always thought of themselves as being seen. We need to put more pressure on them in terms of saying we're going to really make clear the connection between Chinese investment in Sudan and what the Sudanese are able to do in terms of supporting the genocide going on in Darfur. All these steps have to happen yesterday, honestly, but none of them are impossible to do. Every one is possible. We just haven't shown the will to do it, and it's very frustrating to people who are really paying attention to what's happening there to see this drag on month after month.
Do you think most Americans are paying attention?
No, not to Darfur. They're not, and that's another thing. Another thing you can do is if you're president, is you can use the bully pulpit to really draw people's attention to it. A single press release about sanctions against 31 additional countries is not the kind of rallying of American opposition. The truth is, young people have done a pretty good job in terms of raising people's consciousness about it, but I was in school for the opposition to apartheid, and it got at a much bigger profile. So I've been disappointed that the mainstream press hasn't picked up either on the genocide itself or on the opposition growing among young people in this country to the genocide.
Right. I think people are focused always on domestic issues. Healthcare is one of them, right?
Yes.
And you have your own experience with the healthcare system.
Yes.
Kimberly Ripley of New Hampshire has a question about healthcare. She wants to know, if your husband were to become president, will families faced with a healthcare crisis who are uninsured, a family dealing with cancer, say, be able to receive the best, most cutting-edge treatments.
Yes, I mean, what John's Universal Health Care Plan basically says there has to be a policy available to every American at a particular price point. I don't know what that price point is, but at some price point. And if companies want to participate, they have to provide a comprehensive policy. That means that you have really comprehensive treatment. Pre-existing conditions are covered. The long-term care, chronic care, also all of the kinds of care that we would all hope for and expect, all have to be in that universal policy. And the way it's paid for is if you're employed, your employer pays for the policy. We expect, because of efficiencies, for the price of that policy to actually be about $2,500 a year less than the current policies are. Insurance per family. So the employers pay. And the employers pay. If they don't pay, then they pay into a fund that pays. It's based not on whether you're full-time or part-time. You know, they play that game all the time, the 39.5-hour Walmart employee. It's based on a percentage of payroll, so it doesn't help them to play that game. You know, that they're still going to have to pay in for part-time employees as well. And so your employer will pay into this fund that will pay for your insurance. If you're self-employed or unemployed, you'll pay. Your insurance policy you have to pay for it individually. But if you earn less than $100,000, the federal government helps you pay. It could be that you pay nothing, but it could be that you have to make a contribution for it on a sliding scale. But then at that point, everybody has a policy for every condition they have. And pharmaceuticals that are available to me under my policy would be available to people under the universal health care policy. There should be no reason that anyone gets less treatment than I'm getting at the present time.
This question's from David Mursky, and he wants to know how the personal struggles you and your husband have faced, I mean, we all have read the stories, have shaped your character, and how have they prepared you, the two of you, to be president and first lady?
You know, I think that one of the things that I know that some campaigns are saying, John won't be able to serve as president if Elizabeth gets sicker. I have to tell you that John has lived through the worst things that can happen to somebody, and instead of collapsing under them, it brought out the fight in him to actually accomplish something. And so he's been tested in a way that, frankly, we don't really see most candidates tested. I'm not wishing that on anybody, mind you, but he's already walked through the fire and come out the other side. So you know how he's going to perform in a crisis, and whether he'll be distracted by personal issues. He clearly will be able to have the kind of focus we'll need in a president. Our experiences also put some of the issues that Americans face in personal perspective for us. When we read, when at the end of the rolls of George Stephanopoulos, at the end of this week with George Stephanopoulos, always does who died during that past week. They're not just names to us. We read where they live. We read how old they are. We imagine their stories and imagine their parents or their wives or children putting away their things, and grieving for the loss of these splendid young men and women. So that degree of empathy with healthcare issues or job issues, it's not just our personal struggles. John's hometown basically, has suffered greatly from trade issues. All the three major manufacturers no longer located there. There's no real industry in a town that used to have some. And so when he talks about these issues, it's really personal to him. And so he has an empathy that's really hard to recreate by reading a book. I think that makes him a very special candidate. Will make him an incredible president.
Moms tend to be a little judgmental of other moms.
Yes.
And I wonder if you feel that from people who see you out on the campaign trail, working as hard as you are. Given your health situation, your children are on the campaign trail with you now. Are they traveling with you? Yeah. Do you think that why do moms do that? And why do we have to judge what other choices people are making in their personal lives? Why? Is that exclusive to moms, do you think? Or?
Well, it's probably not, although, women, thank goodness, are pretty outspoken about what they feel.
For better or worse?
No, that's for that. No, yeah. I mean, I think that's good actually. And although people don't usually confront me face to face, I have been confronted in a mom's blog on the issue of whether or not I was making the right decisions for my children. And I don't even mind, because it gives me an opportunity to say a lot of things. Our children are being homeschooled this year. That allows us, when they'll be in New Hampshire with John and with me for part of the weekend and part of the week. The school's calendar is not important to me. I can take them out and they can come with us whenever it works for them, whenever we're going to be in one place. They don't puddle jump with us. That wouldn't be any good for them. But when we're going to be in one place and we get to really be together as a family, that's great. Last time we were in New Hampshire, they did the Freedom Trail in Massachusetts as part of what they did, part of their education. A tutor came with them and took them around while we did town halls. And then we had breakfast with them and dinner with them. And if they wanted to join us, which is not that often during campaigning, they have the option themselves of making that decision. When they're home, they have overnights with their friends. They participate in sports. They have regular kid lives. They know, as I described it, that I have a disease. And what they're going to think of later is not just whether I was honest with them about the disease, but how it was their parents responded. The truth of the matter is, we never know for certain what the most important parenting lesson will ever give them. It's unlikely to be how it is you make a bow on your shoes, though you have to teach them that too. But, it's unlikely to be algebra. It's more likely to be how it is you confront bad things when they happen to you. And the lesson we're teaching them is, when bad things happen, you don't curl up in a ball. You continue to fight for the things that you thought were important. You think about the men and women serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, the sacrifice that they're willing to make, and the lessons they're teaching their children. I was the child in a military family. We made these same sacrifices, and my father was in Vietnam and in Korea. And the lessons we learned there are some things that are really big, and that it's important that you make a commitment to the things that you think are important and that you follow through. And sometimes the people you love most dearly are going to have to make a sacrifice because of those things. I actually think that's not a bad lesson to learn. And, I don't think anybody who's ever been in my shoes is critical. And I hope that the people who are critical never get to find out what choice they would make, never have the hard day where they find out that the choice they would make is to continue to live as fully as they know how, for themselves and for their children.